Everyone, this is the City of Morro Bay Harbor Advisory Board, Thursday, October 7th, 2021. It's a regular meeting. And Laurie, could we establish a quorum?
Sure. Sharice Hansen?
Here.
Jean Dowdy?
Here.
Lynn Meissen?
Here.
Cal Myers?
Here.
Chris Bale? Chris Bale?
Now I'm here.
Mary Witkowski?
Here.
Laurie French? And you have a quorum.
All right, thank you. Okay, so at this time, we would like to have a moment of silence for the people who we should be thinking about right now. All right, thank you. And Mary has offered to do the Pledge of Allegiance for us this evening.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Mary. Okay, so now we're going to go around the room and do board member announcements. So I'm going to go on the top of my screen. Cal, you're up first.
Sure. Most of the stuff I've been working on is going to be covered later in the agenda, the parking and various other things. The one or two things I wanted to announce is the Coleman Park Harbor Walk Community Vision Meeting. That's going to be Tuesday, October 19th. If anybody's listening and they want to attend, that would be fantastic. For the HAB members, we would like to RSVP. We do risk, if more than 3 of us show up, establishing a quorum. So if anybody does want to go, please reach out to Greg, well, I don't even know how to pronounce his last name, Kwalik, and let him know, and we can negotiate if more than 3 of us want to attend. I know a few of us, because it is during the normal business hours, may not be able to attend. I just checked my calendar. I know I have a meeting at that time, but I don't know if others from the HAB want to attend. So that's it on the Coleman Park Harbor Walk. Should be interesting. And then the second piece, and I mentioned this before we started, but as part of the outreach, I've been in contact with the liveaboards and boat owners. The bathrooms are in constant turmoil. They did have a lot of vandalism about 2 or 3 weeks ago. They fixed the broken locks, and we're trying to work with the maintenance folks to get a more thorough cleaning of those bathrooms. And I keep getting pictures of it, and it looks pretty, I don't even want to walk in their shoes, put it that way. So hopefully Greg and the staff will get a more regular cleaning schedule for it. That's all I have.
All right. Thank you, Cal. And next is Chris.
I'll save myself for the meeting.
Okay, thanks, Chris. And Mary.
Sure, I'll give an announcement. Parks and Rec is putting on a trunk or treat Sunday the 31st. Small businesses and community organizations are invited to participate, and if you have kids, it should be great fun for them.
All right. Thank you, member Mary, and scroll down. Let's go for Jean Dowdy. Jean.
Well, as you know, winter is on the way. If you have a boat out on the bay on the mooring or tied to a slip, make sure your pennant lines are tied up and your dock lines are secure. I just inspected a mooring this week, and the pennant lines were frayed. They were down to less than 1/4 of an inch. So I would advise anybody who has a boat on the bay, make sure your pennant lines are ready for this winter. That's it.
All right. Thank you, Jean. And Lynn?
Yes. Every summer, the Morro Bay Yacht Club has summer sailing lessons. It's always been a very popular program. We've been doing this for the 60 years we've been in business. And it has been so popular that this year they have decided to carry some limited lessons on through the winter time. So we have one highly competent instructor, Andrew Monroe, who is teaching classes 2 days for the class, and times and dates are amenable to both instructor and instructees. You can call the yacht club or go on the website morrobayyachtclub.net, learn to sail, and sign up or get more information. And wintertime is a great time to take lessons because you probably will get wind, which you don't always have in the summertime.
All right.
That's it.
Perfect. Thank you, Member Lynn Mason. Okay, then did we get a hold of Laurie French? Was she able to log on?
She's still working on it.
Okay.
Having downloading issues, but she's trying.
All right. As far as I'm concerned, I don't have any at this time. We've been working a lot on the parking, so we'll talk about that in our first item. But for right now, and we have no presentations, so the next thing would be to open public comment. Highland, do we have anybody in the queue that is interested in doing public comment at this time?
Thank you, Chair. I do not see any raised hands in the queue.
Okay, thank you. All right.
Island, it looks like we might have Laurie French in the attendee queue.
I'll move her over to panelist. Thank you, Eric.
Perfect, thank you.
Okay.
So
And Eric, it's not on the agenda, but do we want to approve any minutes of previous meetings at this time or no? Okay.
No, don't have any minutes.
Okay, and so we have the consent items, which is the staff report. Did anybody want to pull the staff report for Harbor Department status? Seeing none. So do we want to approve the agenda item A1?
I'll make that motion.
Okay. Anybody to second?
I will second.
Okay. Perfect. Moving right along. Okay. Do we need to take a vote, Laurie?
Yes, you have to take it.
All right. So, Laurie, go for it.
Sharice Hansen?
Yes.
Member Dowdy?
Yes.
Member Myason?
Yay.
Member Myers?
Yes.
Member Vale?
Yes.
Member Witkowski?
Yes.
Member French?
Yes, can you guys hear me?
There you are.
Okay, my computer's trying to do an update and reinstall at the same time. I'm like, no!
And your motion passes.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, Laurie. That will move us right along to agenda item B1, which is the Harbor Advisory Board review, general input, and recommend next steps on parking management and paid parking. We'll hand that over to Eric Endersby, the Harbor Director.
All right, thank you, Sharice. Welcome back for another meeting. So, as part of the, back in 2017, as you recall from our meeting in September, the Harbor Advisory Board approved a memo to kind of stating their position on paid parking and their list of issues that they think should be considered if paid parking was ever established on the waterfront. And so that's kind of the beginning background of paid parking in the Harbor Advisory Board. And like I said, last September, just September 2 of this year, we had this as an agenda item looking at paid parking and parking management in the Walker study that the city did last summer. Had a study conducted by Walker Consultants that they did over last summer and fall. a member of which is here today to be able to answer questions, as is the city manager a little bit later. So we did a study on parking demand on the waterfront and downtown. And so the results of that study we put in your agenda last meeting, and then this meeting we've got a link to it if you need to look at it. So again, the study was really to understand existing parking needs and see how current parking is currently used around the waterfront, and then maybe some solutions to make it better and be more functional in the future. So at our last meeting, the HAB voted to establish an ad hoc committee, which would include members of the public to help guide the HAB's effort to look at parking management and paid parking. Cal Myers was volunteered as the chair of that committee, and I think Member Vale and Member Hansen, Chair Hansen, are both on that committee as well. I'll let Cal present an update on what they've done when I get a little further along. So they've met a couple times, discussed the Walker study, and I'll let him discuss who's on that group and what they've done so far. So we've got a representative, again, of Walker Consultants here today. That's Stefan Turoff and the city manager, Scott Collins. The city council will be looking at this study likely in the November 9th city council meeting. That's the first and probably the only meeting in November, where they're going to really have their first public look at the Walker study and give staff direction on what to do with it, or if anything. We suspect if the council says to continue moving forward, there'll be considerable other public outreach and stakeholder meetings and whatnot to sort of guide the city's effort in that regard. So what we're really looking for tonight is sort of a thumbs up or a thumbs down on should the city continue to pursue parking management, and a subset of that would be paid parking along the waterfront and along the Embarcadero, which is our purview. Main Street's also Armove Boulevard's also under consideration, but that's not really in our purview. So we're really looking for any kind of recommendation to the council, whether the council should direct staff to continue pursuing parking management, paid parking. And then sort of second would be, is the Walker study a good jumping off point for that? A baseline of information to start that process? And do we want to continue the ad hoc committee's work? The Harbor Advisory Board ad hoc committee's work to help guide the Harbor Advisory Board and the City Council. And then the 2017 HAB memo, is that still the HAB's current position on paid parking in and around the Embarcadero? So like most things that we do, our information will be passed on as appropriate to the City Council to review and take into consideration and provide the next steps to the city staff on where we may take the study and parking management along the waterfront. Like I said, we suspect there'll be further advisory body review of this, other public review. I think it's being taken to PWAB and the other bodies of the city, and the other advisory bodies. So there's going to be ample opportunity for lots of things to be vetted here. So with that, I'm going to open it. Actually, Cal, if the chairman of the ad hoc committee, if you want to give a brief report, then I'll open up to questions, which will allow some good input, hopefully, and some good Q&A with Stefan from Walker Consultants.
Okay. Yeah, again, this is Cal Myers. We did an outreach. Actually, Therese did a lot of the legwork. We've got, we believe, a fairly good representation of the people that would be impacted by, parking management along the Embarcadero. We have a hotel owner, restaurant, boat owners, liveaboard, retail store, part of the committee. We've informally also talked to the yacht club and the boat charter, although they're not formally part of the ad hoc committee. Like Eric said, the 2017 study was just focused primarily on paid parking. We tried to really take a look at it of, how can we maximize the value out of that parking to the HAB or the Embarcadero area. Got some really good input. I think we've met 4 or 5 times now. Teresa's graciously given us access to a place along the Embarcadero to meet there, so it's been pretty good. Again, we focus primarily along the Embarcadero, essentially from the intake building down to the boat ramp area. That was just really our area of focus. A little bit up on Main Street around Dorn, not Main Street, Market, just the 2 blocks there, because there was a city park, a little parking lot up there. So included that in there. Again, we're not including just paid parking. That's just one element of it, whether it's time constraints, 2-hour parking, overnight parking, those types of things, and the signage that goes along with that. One of the areas that we really sort of focused on, and unfortunately the Stefan from the Walker groups here, is, there was reference to people that parked there a long time. And so we sort of deep dive into that area. Who are those people? Where does it make sense for them to park? What's the implication if they move somewhere? That piece of it. We also, in addition to those folks, the liveaboards, because it's, some of those folks it's a residential for them, the boat trailers, all that kind of thing. So we tried to, localize it and make sure that, we get ahead of those types of issues. Employees are always a big issue. When employees, and this will hurt Eric's feelings, but we also want to include the Coast Guard and the Harbor Patrol because they are employees along the Embarcadero. So if they need carve-outs, they need carve-outs, but we should make sure that they're included. A couple of the areas of really concern that came out in different context, but I sort of boiled down again, sort of the employee safety. There's the anecdotal of, walking with the money bag, half a mile, late at night. Availability for the employees. If your employee shows up at 2:00 on a Saturday afternoon, that's a shift start. We want him to be able to park somewhere so he can, get to work. And again, the boat owners down there, they pay to have their boat moored there. Don't want to alienate them as well. We also spent quite a bit of time talking about additional parking. Scott Collins and Scott Graham showed up at one of our sessions, and they gave us what a price tag of a 200 parking spot lot would be. That was kind of a buzzkill. $10 million for 200 lots. We also spent a bit of time talking about some of the vacant land that's in that area, specifically around the Blue Sail Inn. It is private property. Talked about the Triangle lot, a lot of that history. There was some discussion of that may have been designated to be a parking structure once upon a time, but things move on with the power plant. And then just in general, Scott talked about squeezing more cars into the spot we have, restriping a little bit. Sort of the consensus from the group is some sort of tiered parking structure, with the prime spots being, the most regulated, whether that's paid or time constraints. And we felt that was the most valuable to the Embarcadero, because of the turnover. Somebody shows up, buys dinner, buys trinkets, and goes home, has a place to park, and so just drive on through. And then sort of that secondary parking area, a little bit farther away, but still close enough, for people there that are overnight, people, hotel guests, whatnot. And then, of course, the specialty parking. I've already mentioned the boat trailers, boat ramp area. That's kind of where we stopped. Again, we've just been in information gathering mode. And based on the output of this meeting, we'll go through with a thumbs up, thumbs down, sort of consolidate the information that we have into the appropriate, memo to give to the city council. We'll pause there. Any questions? That's pretty much where we're at. I don't know, Therese or Chris, you had anything to add?
Cal, did you guys talk about the parking lot out at the Rock?
I didn't include that here because it doesn't. I didn't want to address it because it's sort of a different set of issues. I was looking more how that would impact, the stakeholders in and around the Embarcadero. Like I said, we could include it, but we didn't at this point.
Yeah, I think it's a separate item.
Sure. Hey, Chris.
Yeah, I just remind everybody that, and I used this term in one of our meetings, it's like a balloon. We need to be careful and thoughtful. Obviously, we know where the most valuable section of the Embarcadero is, for instance, and if we institute paid parking there, we're going to squeeze the center of the balloon, and the ends are going to fill up. And when the ends of the balloon fill up, George out at the fish company in that parking lot are going to get popular, the liveaboards are going to have a problem at the south end of the day that they already have problems with. And so we've got to be really careful. And I would remind everybody that we have a parking problem in the dead of season in the middle of the day. We didn't have a parking problem on the Embarcadero yesterday. We didn't have one on Monday. I was there. We didn't have one today. And so as we go after this, we have to understand that we're going after a cure of a kind of a part-time issue. Center of the day, center of the season. And we have to be careful of our neighbors. The liveaboards we've had at our meetings have said, we don't move our car on weekends. Well, I don't go to Morro Bay on weekends. It's kind of like, we have a parking problem. We need more parking spaces. And I'm not sure charging for them and squeezing the balloon is the answer. So we've got to tread carefully, because we can make a lot of people angry or a few people angry, but I don't think we're going to make everybody happy no matter what we do. That's it. And we're having a meeting next week, are we not, Cal?
Yes.
Okay.
So I'd like to jump in, and I'm going to open up the floor, I guess, to questions for Stefan from Walker, because he's on limited time, and Scott as well. And any questions from either the committee or the board or myself, probably a good time to get that going.
See Laurie's hand up.
I'm sorry, my speakers were going in and out. This has been the computer tech day from hell. If this has been addressed, I apologize. My concern would be commercial fishermen, because that's what I'm here for. Mm-hmm. We have a hard enough time parking right now. We use the loading zone, for instance, in front of Giovanni's. We use the loading zone as a parking spot, and we trade spots with whoever truck is there. Paid parking, I think, would be a disaster for us. And honestly, this is totally not for paid parking, but I'd like to see commercial fishermen get some sort of sticker that says we can park, and spots that were just designed for commercial fishermen, which I know that would piss like everybody off.
Loading zones?
But that has come up, some sort of hang tags for the people that have a mooring out there. Again, we've considered the issues that Drew have as a liveaboard along with the commercial fishermen. It's a very similar issue.
Yeah, because our other boat is, one boat's in front of Giovanni's, the other boat is by Stacks. And fighting for parking spaces down there is just, it's interesting, especially when you have to load and unload gear.
Yep.
So I'm going to jump back in again. Any questions for Walker? I mean, these are all great topics that we're going to dive into further as time goes on, assuming the council gives us marching orders to keep going down this road. So,
okay. So can we have them introduce themselves?
Sure.
Stefan?
Sure. Thank you. I'm Stefan Taroff. I'm the director of planning for Walker. We are a 50-plus-year-old company that really started out designing parking structures. And, the planning side really kicked in about 20, 25 years ago when we saw that simply adding capacity or building new structures wasn't always the solution. I guess I'll come into this discussion this way. I heard what you said about the price tag. That is an issue, the cost of providing parking. I thought there were so many great comments, and really I would agree with all of them, just about, based on what we learned in the study. I think just a couple of those. Building parking is expensive. The other thing, though, is when you add capacity, typically you still need to manage. The management problem on the street is still there, because most people prefer to park on the street or in a nice little surface lot, close by to where they're going. A parking structure people tend to avoid. And, that's a big part of our product that we do, but people tend to avoid that. So if you you want, right now, essentially on the Embarcadero, there's not any regulation. It's catch as catch can. If you show up first, you find a parking space. If, as somebody pointed out, you show up at 2 p.m. for your shift in the summer, you probably won't find a parking space. So even if you add capacity, most likely you're adding capacity somewhere on the periphery or somewhere, looking at some of those lots, say, up on the inland side of the Embarcadero, where we saw, to some extent it was less busy. So like, let's say if you built a structure there, just for example, I know we're really not talking about that, but what would you still have people competing for the primary spaces, the most popular spaces? And I think, we would say yes. I'm trying to hit all these points, which I thought were good ones. Basically, in almost every city we work in, and again, I've managed projects in about 50 or 60 municipalities in California, probably about a third or half of them in the coastal zone. It's a question of allocation. You have everybody competing for the most popular spaces, and then almost always there are spaces out somewhere that are not that busy. So I mentioned the last meeting in the Planning Commission, almost every city where we study, typically the peak demand is 66, 70%. And there are almost always 30% of spaces available. Now, in your case, I think we found in the summer it was 85% of the spaces were taken up. So that was exceptionally busy. And during the weekday on the summer, things were 67%, which again, it's not that you have a third of the spaces open, it's that you have all this congestion and impacted spaces where it's hard finding a space, say in the middle of the Embarcadero, but then as you go out to the side, there are some spaces available. Part of my point in saying that is your summer overall is quite busy. We're working right now in Newport Beach. Their summer weekends are busy. Their weekdays are not. Your weekdays are still pretty busy. But I think the point was very well taken, first of all, about the balloon, that analogy, Christopher, but that also you do have really quiet periods. And, I mentioned I love Morro Bay. Fortunately, because of the pandemic, the last time I was there was in December, and it was pretty quiet. I mean, it got busy in the middle of the day, but, part of what you're doing is you're trying to ensure availability when it's the most popular and people are coming down there. So, again, I'm sort of firing all this at you, but, the question really is at those busy periods, what do you want to do? And then, the quiet periods, maybe you don't, regulate as strictly, or you don't have paid parking. I guess the last thing I'll say is, paid parking is typically a more efficient way of putting in time limits. Time limits, if you have a 2-hour time limit, then you have to go by twice to enforce that. You have paid parking, typically you just see if the meter is paid or not. So it does throw off revenue, but it is also a lot more efficient. And another thing I'll add is, with paid parking, you can get rid of time limits and people can pay as they go. I'm trying to answer all these questions, things that came up. But, this is ultimately a policy decision. And it's really, paid parking is about increasing overall capacity, which typically your busiest spaces turn more often once you have paid parking. And your less busy spaces is where people who are spending a long time parked and typically would not park in those underutilized spaces, well, now they have an incentive to do so. And if they really need those busy spaces, then they go there and pay. So maybe the person running late at 2 o'clock, they'll say, okay, for my shift, maybe I'll come in and I'll pay for an hour or something before my break, and then I'll move my car, but this gets me there on time. Those are all the considerations that go into this. So I think, this is typically a busy system like yours. You install paid parking to increase overall capacity and to turn spaces over where they're not turning. One thing as I reread the report that I thought did not come out very clearly was, we looked at turnover and we said, okay, most spaces are turning over, 1-2 hours. That was true, but a full third of the spaces, not the cars, but a full third of the spaces had cars parked there 4 hours or more, 4, 5, 6, 9 hours. And we look at that and we say, okay, that could be a lot of people coming for a couple hours. Do you want people to have, when I hear, I don't go down to the Embarcadero in the summer, this is all about availability. Do you want people to have the opportunity to find a space rather than sort of a lottery or, coming super early to find a space to say, okay, it's paid parking. And if I pay a couple of bucks, I will find a space. So that's a lot of things out there. I hope maybe, hopefully clear enough, but those are the considerations I think that go into this whole process.
Right. And Steph, this is Scott Collins, city manager. I think that Laurie brought up a good question that was raised by liver boards that were repped in that meeting last week. I attended with Scott Graham. Just that question of, passes or, preferential treatment, if you will, for locals or what. I mean, it's sort of a big bucket of things, and each specific group has different concerns. And I think the commercial fisherwomen group has a valid concern. So just kind of your thoughts on that.
A couple of things on that. One thing, if everyone says it's working now, that's something to consider. Maybe it is working. I think the idea is, when somebody goes down the Embarcadero, if they need a space, they'll find it. And so I'm just throwing this out there, and it may not work for everyone, but say for the case in fishermen, could you say, well, there's paid parking, and they would have a place that would be, let's just say a couple of bucks for an hour, and they could go there and they could unload and maybe park for a little while, and then would there be longer term location where vehicles or equipment or trailers could move. May or may not work. Liveaboards I recognize are really a different animal. And right now we're working in other places. Alamitos Bay Marina, obviously much more urban than what we're talking about, what you have. But the boat owners have grandfathered in. They have parking associated with their slips. That type of thing is very hard to get put into effect these days with the California Coastal Commission. But, if you did this as part of a package where you said, okay, look, we do have people living there, it's reasonable to think that they should have some parking. Is that part of the trade-off where overall you say we have a program where we're creating more availability for the general public to park and access to the coast, which is what Coastal Commission wants. Is that something that then maybe they would consider for a liveaboard? I think it's tough. The main thing is the California Coastal Commission wants equal access to the coast for everyone in a nutshell. And so to give someone a preference is tough. Are there people with preferences along the coast? There are. There are different programs. So I think it could be doable, but I think that's just a greater challenge. It's not in a city away from the coast. You want to give somebody a permit and special, they can buy a monthly or yearly permit. You just do it, and it works. At the coast, it's a little more complicated.
Right, and I think the report also recommended free, quote unquote, free parking areas or area that could be used for long-term parkers as well.
Absolutely. If you're going to have paid parking somewhere where all the competition for parking occurs, then ideally you have another place where you can. Typically, the challenge is, do you want to park fast and conveniently if you have a need? Or if you don't have that need, you can park free, but you're going to park a little farther away. In parking planning, whether we work for airports, ports, employment restaurants, the longer you're there, and I know some of you may not like the sound of this, but the longer you're there, typically you park a little farther because the busiest place you do want as many cars to be able to go through as possible. Now, would that work for some of your fishermen and boat owners? Could a plan or a program be set up where, okay, when you needed those spaces down the Embarcadero, they were there, but on the other hand, maybe you don't have carte blanche to park, as long as you want. I don't know if that would be acceptable for what they need or not, but that's the idea that goes behind that type of parking planning.
All right, thank you so much. One of the things that I was thinking is, Laurie, Laurie French, member, do you feel like it's fine right now, that it's working for the fishermen the way that current status quo?
I would have to check with the guys down at Tidelands. That's Jeremiah's area. I think they're okay down there. I think there's a little bit of tussle. I know for those of us who have slips at the end of Beach Street, it's impossible. It's, being what it is. I mean, I wrote a story about a national fisherman, actually, because I've been cussed out for trying to maneuver my truck, and I had another fisherman stand at the parking spot right in front of Giovanni's where the ramp comes up. I had another fisherman stand right there to hold the spot where I was backing up to bring my truck in so we could unload stuff from the boat. And I got cussed out by somebody from Fresno. Okay, I'm assuming they were from Fresno. But I was just like, wow, we're trying to do business here. And it wasn't a very pleasant experience.
Yeah, so one of the things that my question is rooted from that, as far as the study goes, and as far as paid parking goes, do you feel that that it might be better if there's more turnover because of paid parking, or is it still the thing that the commercial fishermen experiencing just unique?
I think it's probably because we're unique, and I think if you ask commercial fishermen to pay for parking, you're going to hit a very negative thing because we've got enough capital right now, and to ask a guy who's working on his boat for a few hours to run up and feed a meter when he's down in the bilge, that's not going to go over real well.
Okay.
Did that answer your question?
Yeah, well, kind of. So, okay, let's move on. Let's. Anybody else have any other questions for Stephen?
Stephen?
There we go. Jean?
Stephen, I have a couple of questions. By any chance, did you read our staff report? There was a letter from Rick Deecher, and I'm just curious whether you read it or not. Seems to me he has a lot of valid points.
I think that was that from, I'm sorry, about 2 weeks ago?
It was, yeah, that was the one I shared with you.
That was the one, yes, I did.
Yeah, it's the same letter, I believe.
Yes.
And then the next other question is, if I remember right from your report, you had paid parking along the entire Embarcadero. I would feel as though the north end of the Embarcadero from Beach Street North is a different animal. And then also the parking out at the Rock is a completely separate issue. I think those ought to be separated out.
Right. If I may, let me say two things about that, because, Laurie, you brought up about, fishermen paying meters, which sounds, of course, like a nightmare. And, the idea of where this takes place. I think overall what we're saying, especially in as busy and popular area as the Embarcadero is, especially in the busiest parts, parking should be managed deliberately, purposefully. And right now, it really is not. There's none of that regulation going on to ensure, other than, say, a 72-hour rule or something like that. I think I heard at one point talk about, well, if we put up signs, and signs typically require enforcement. When you just put up signs, the tourists might come and worry about it, but the regulars who know they can park for 2-3 days without any repercussions, they won't. So I think, where this takes place, of course, the devil is in the details. That's an important point. And like you said, I think, as a beach on North, there was, I'd have to pull up the map. Some areas are certainly busier than others. And it's right, you're right about the balloon. Things spill out, but that's part of the idea is that, instead of everybody competing for the small area, you want to spread things out and everybody has a shop where they need to find parking. So again, where and how people pay is one thing. There is technology. There are ways that you don't have to keep feeding a meter. That is not desirable. Either through technology or buying a day pass or buying a 2-day pass or something like that. Where it goes, I agree. We want to be sensitive to where this occurs. Some places may need parking, some places less. Some places may need paid parking after you implement it because of the balloon, as you say. I would just recommend right now that don't get too concerned about the details, although the details are important, they're crucial, but do you need a little more management there so you don't get situations like somebody backing in and going berserk because somebody is holding a space? You implement paid parking to ensure reasonable availability when there is none, and to make sure that it's not carte blanche for people to use, not only leave cars for a long time or trucks or trailers, but when there's a shortage of something, people hoard it, and that's what happens with parking. We see all the time, we work in universities where, there's so little parking, students show up 2 hours earlier, they don't leave the campus when they go to work, and they just keep their cars forever, and it exacerbates the situation. I think if you have a few employees switching off spaces here, if you have people like saying, oh my goodness, this is a valuable space, I will do anything to hold on to it, that's not ideal, because it becomes a vicious cycle. And you have even less parking available. So I would say, yes, pay attention to the details, but those are not the considerations. I think the first question is, do you have a problem? And the point was raised, how often do you have a problem? Is it a negative impact? And, I get the question all the time, when do you charge for parking? And, I say when the frustration of finding a space is greater than the inconvenience or begrudgingly paying $2, $3, $4. When the city manager, when Scott first called me about this, and he said, we're looking into, parking management and paid parking, and he said, but I know, he said that you don't charge for parking unless you're trying to fix a problem. We have some smaller cities saying we just need revenue, and it doesn't work because it's not worth it for people to pay parking. We just need revenue. Your paid parking is you're giving somebody something for their money. You're giving them some availability and accessibility, and there is a problem to solve. And that's really, I think, for you all in many ways to determine, is there a problem during your busiest times where a lot of members of the public just can't find parking? And according to the surveys we did, it seems like the answer is yes. Recognizing much of the year that's not the case, but a significant time of the year it is, and then you have to decide, what percentage of our business. We were working in Santa Barbara with a business group, and they said, well, 30%. It was Christmas season. We talked about, well, do you charge and how much do you charge during Christmas season? And they said, well, it's only a few weeks, but that's when 40% of our business occurs, or something along those lines. So those are all considerations. Ultimately, it is a policy decision, but I would say be careful not to get too far into the details, because it's a bigger question. Are you trying to solve a problem? And it seems to us like, yes, cities with far less of a parking problem have made a reasonable decision to start charging. So it's worth considering.
You didn't answer any of my questions, but I'll move ahead.
I'm so sorry. No. Please. What specifically?
Well, I asked you, is you were thought about paid parking on the entire Embarcadero, including north of the Rock, or north of Beach Street, and how did you feel about separating the Rock parking lot?
Okay, let me answer that. Yeah. Two things. I think we would start, fairly central, where on every map we had in the report, it was red. It was red on the weekend, it was red in the weekdays, and it was even red some of the off season. So would we go all the way to the full Embarcadero? Probably not. Certainly not for starters. I think you look at where is the problem the most severe, and I could look at the map and say, Marina, I think it was about 4 blocks. I have to see Marina, Beach, really that central area. Yeah. So no, I would. There are reasons to do the whole Embarcadero, but I'd say that's a big chunk, and I wouldn't start off doing that.
Thank you.
That way. Does that make sense?
One other statement you made was that people avoid the parking structures.
Yes.
I think most of the people here in this county, when we drive to San Luis Obispo itself, we use the parking structures. They're almost always used.
Well, I'll say something about that, because we've done a lot of work in San Luis Obispo. People will go to the parking structure in San Luis Obispo because there are meters on the street and there are time limits on the street. But if you just have free parking on the street, and there are plenty of places this happens, they're just going to go around on the street because it's a lottery. Can I find parking on the street? But the reason it works in San Luis Obispo is the street is highly regulated and enforced.
Okay, thank you.
And the last thing you asked about the Rock, I do think the Rock is a different animal. I think you start getting this gray area, some of the lots along, I think it's Coleman, which were busier than the rock lot itself. I do think it's a different animal. I think it's really talking about where the businesses are. The Rock is worth considering, but that's separate.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So we have Laurie's hand up. Was it a follow-up question?
It was just a kind of another scenario that I'm going to throw into the pot, which might be a detail or not. out-of-town fishermen. Okay, my husband was fishing up in Bodega, and he left a vehicle in the parking lot up there for a good 2 months. And I mean, that does happen. It's with the regulations and things changing, it's not so happening so much in Morro Bay anymore. But, you know, a couple of years ago, we had a hell of a salmon season, and there were guys that were, you know, they sent their vehicles down here and they stayed here. And that's just, it's another scenario. Oh, and then my son wanted me to show you all this. Okay. Okay, that's all I have.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay.
I'm very familiar with that book. I know Don Shoup, who wrote it, very well. I will say that. As for somebody leaving their vehicle for 2 months, and I'm not trying to sound judgmental or harsh, and I understand how those things would need to happen, I'll just say this. How many hours, how many customers, potentially, depending on where the vehicle was left, could not find a space when that happened? You know, I recognize people have needs, but that's the type of thing. That's, you know, and you look at the high cost of free parking, that coastal real estate, having one vehicle essentially stored, you know, not customer, not even employees, that's a very expensive, I mean, I'll say it, subsidy or giveaway to one person. And I mean, and I understand if I were in that situation, gosh, what do you do? But that's where we say the long-term parkers, especially 2 months, we don't want them taking up a space that could serve so many other people throughout the busy season.
Right. So that was kind of what I was trying to make as a question to Laurie's original comment is it a problem right now to find parking? And it is. And so there is the possibility that paid parking would free up those spaces when you actually need to load and unload. Granted that you might be working on the boat, but the most important thing is that if you have to get to your boat back and forth within the hour, you need those parking spaces. You need to be close because of that access. But if you're just going to be on your boat and not need to take things off, you know, parking a little bit farther, like the Triangle parking lot or a little bit up the hill, might not be that bad. So if it's still a problem right now, there's a possibility that with a paid parking program, you could find a spot right up front a lot faster than you would if there wasn't, because maybe somebody's parked there for 2 months. So anyway, I don't know if that's what you would say would happen. Is there more turnover? And so when you really need to load and unload, Stephen?
I mean, that is the question. Is the availability crucial? I mean, basically, you're paying, but you're paying for the convenience. And the more convenience, the more time, you're paying for time. The more time you need, the more you'd pay if it's worth it to you. You know, if you can unload in 30 minutes and then move your car, and, you know, we can talk again. I mean, it's crucial, but it's also a detail. You know, how does that work where you move your car away from the Embarcadero? But then, you know, then do you leave it in that long-term parking for 2 months and not worry about it? So I think the answer to your question, from what I understand, is yes. If we're trying to solve a problem, you know, right now it's the lottery. And I always think, you know, when we deal with commercial centers and we say, why does everybody drive to the front door first when they know they're almost never going to find parking there? And then they go all the way to the back of the lot. And the reason is they remember that time, 1 out of 10 times that they found the space. And I think that happens in situations like that. And everybody likes to win the lottery. But, you know, this is, like I said, more deliberate, more purposeful. Make sure that people have the opportunity to get the space when they need it. And use spaces that are not that busy for that long-term storage. Because long-term parking is, in fact, storage. Short-term parking is part of the transportation system, part of the roadway network. We could go into that, but that's all traffic engineering and all that.
Okay. Thanks for your patience, Mary. I'm going to go with your question, and then Laurie, I'll come back to you if we just need to move along, maybe get a new thing. So anyway, Mary.
Thanks. And I don't know if you heard, Stephen, but we actually do sell winning lottery tickets here in Morro Bay. That's official. So I was going to ask, what do you think is the lightest touch possible? like parking management implementation before you determine that it's not worth it?
The lightest touch, you mean, let's say, before putting in paid parking?
No, before, like, versus doing nothing. What would be like minimum time of the year, minimum hours, minimum day? Like, what do you think is like the lightest touch implementation of managed parking? Like before, where you would say it's like not worth it at all?
Oh, you mean in terms of narrowing that window? I mean, the key thing, I think, in terms of seasons or times of day is you want it to be consistent and understandable to the public. You know, in a number of cities where we work, there's busy season, shoulder season, and low season, but there's always paid parking. You know, in a number of other communities, the question is, you know, are people scratching their head? Gee, am I, paying today or not? You know, is there a time limit today or not? I'd probably want to get back to you to give you a precise answer, but I would say overall, and would want your input, you know, weekends and probably summer. I mean, summer we saw was pretty consistently busy, but, you know, I think this is, you know, worth discussing, but, you know, even your weekdays, summer were busy. You know, in response to that question, I think, Gene, your question, in a core area, weekends, summer, absolutely it's warranted. Weekday summer, I think it's warranted. Again, just in that busy area. And then I think, you know, weekends, from what I've seen in Morro Bay and what our data showed is, you know, that busy area, I think it's still warranted. And as far as the hours of the day, again, these are details, but I would say, you know, something along the lines of, you could say 11 to 7. I know I've had dinner down there a number of times, but, you know, is it more the lunchtime crowd, 11 to 4? Just an example of what happens, though, and we saw some of this in San Luis Obispo for a while, a few years ago. You know, if you end paid parking or parking restrictions, time limits too early, the dinner staff shows up at 4. Maybe they can park for 2 hours legally, but then they stay all night. Another thing, I heard your issues of security, and I could talk about that, but basically you do need to spread it out. I think something like an 11 to 7 would be reasonable, but you could narrow that a little bit. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think that's helpful. I was just like interested in where you kind of say like cost benefit analysis, it might not make sense at all.
Well, I would say this from the cost perspective, you know, you'll generate most of your revenue on your busy days. And
yeah,
I'm not saying again,
not cost like that, but cost
right.
of like if I go get coffee on weekday mornings, if I have to pay to like go get a coffee for like 5 minutes, like would I just do a drive-through? Like that kind of like just like right. Cost of like administering the program, like contracting it out, like are people not going downtown, like that kind of cost, not like specific revenue.
Right. Okay. And there are meters that even give you a free period if 10 or 15 minutes would do it. The technology is a little complex. But again, I would ask, I think the first question to ask is, do you not come down to the Embarcadero at times to get a coffee because it's too crowded? Well, in the morning, probably not. But let's say this, morning, no restrictions. You know, if the morning is not the problem, which I know fairly early in the morning, I recall it's not. The one thing you want to make sure of is that, you know, the lunch or employees in general don't show up at 10, 11 o'clock. You know, and then how long can they leave the cars there for a chunk of time? But I think that's a great point. And, you know, we deal with surfers on the coast as well. You know, the surfers who go there day in, day out, you know, they're there early. Well, don't start restrictions that early. Because first and foremost, because it's not really a problem at that time. So I don't have a precise answer for you, but I think you can work around that. It just has to be, it can't be too complex as to how you chop up the time.
Thanks. That's helpful.
Thank you. All right, Laurie, not sure, is your hand up? Again, you ready? You have another question?
More details?
Oh, yeah, no, I just, yeah, okay. I just don't know if they're taking down your hand being raised or forgetting. So yes, go for it.
Okay. Typically, sport fishermen from Verges park on the others, well, in front of Geo's. That's Virgil's. They park on the other side of the Embarcadero. The fisherman just walked in. Okay, our day, I'm just using our boat as a random example. Our day could start at 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning and could end at 10 o'clock at night. And the boat's there. The guys on Beach Street, if they're going to be in for the day, they'll park right in front of the ramp. There's 3 boats there. If the other boats that are on the other side of, that are in front of the parking lot, if the guys are going to be longer, they will park in that parking lot by GAFCO. And they'll try to park in the out-of-way spots already. I don't know how the guys down at Tidelands, they do it. And from my understanding, way back in the day, Morro Bay designed the harbor to draw the tourists, come look at the boats. Every traditional harbor has a specific harbor and pretty much a specific parking area for commercial fishermen. That's what I know. Morro Bay is unique. We don't have that little unicorn.
That's a great point.
Okay. And again, I can tell you that our boat with a shot of the rock is probably the most #1 photograph in Morro Bay. And I'm dead serious. I see it so much on social media.
Right on. Okay, so I don't see another hand raised, so I'm going to go with my questions, and maybe some of the questions that you answer will give other people some of their answers that they were wanting. So you mentioned that people don't really like parking garages. What if? Yeah. Anyway, it seems to me that I'm on the same boat with Jean on that. If there is parking, and you said it with with parking meters on the street, if we did do a pilot program, would you see the need that a parking structure, at least in the next 10 years, would be a real asset to our parking management for long term?
I would say this. It's additional capacity, no question. So, maybe you'd have however many, couple hundred more cars that could park there when the demand for a couple hundred more cars is there. And again, I think that relates to some of the other questions. Again, I'm not anti, garage per se. We design them. That's a big part of what we do. I'm trying to think of a simple way to explain it. And this is just my feeling. So I think the question is, those extra 200 cars, is that essentially latent demand? Is that typically when we see a system, very generally, unregulated, the street fills up first, then the surface lots, then typical public surface lots and private surface lots, and I know yours are a little complicated, especially at the north end of the Embarcadero, and then last you get the parking structure filled. So my point is that parking structure would be there for your busiest times to capture the demand that wasn't being accommodated now. How often does that happen? If you think that it would fill up and that the roadway capacity was there to accommodate that, there could be value in that. Typically, we add capacity when there's a measurable additional land use. For example, 20,000 square feet of restaurant, X more slips being filled, and then you say we need this many spaces. It sounds like you're saying people are not coming because they can't find parking, and that may be true. So I think typically what we say is start managing what you have first. If things are still congested, then you really look at adding capacity. Just another example, I think, and we finished up about 6 months ago in Carpinteria. We've studied every 5 years or so for the past 12, 15 years. They're at about 80, 85%, but the additional land uses are not quite there yet. So they could build more parking, but who is that going to park? it's busy, but we don't see the need yet for more people coming. Now, again, if parking is the constraint frequently, then a parking structure would help. Then the question is, how often is it? And is it really the constraint? Is it the roadway network? Is it just too hard to get down to the Embarcadero? Is there too much congestion on the Embarcadero? Because if during your lunch times on Saturdays in the summer, you can't even get to that parking structure, that's a whole other problem.
Right, and there's also the question of cost. Average parking structures, $30,000 to $50,000 per space. So you're talking about $8 to $10 million, structure for 200 cars. And our parking, any kind of revenue system we expect to spin off of this wouldn't cover the debt service on that.
Parking structures 99% of the time do not pay for themselves, not even close. They are very expensive, and if you're looking at it as an economic development tool, you have to say, how much more revenue, how many more businesses am I helping, how much more additional tax revenue are they throwing off to fund that parking structure? That's exactly, Laurie, what that high cost of free parking is talking about.
All right. So when you did this study and you've done a lot of designing of different things, what is your perception of the current way that we have everything, like the dilapidated green curbs, the dirt lot that doesn't seem to have an entrance? Do you think that we're losing customers right now because they just don't know where to park and what it means to park in those spaces?
To the extent, again, when I hear somebody say, well, I don't go down there because I know I won't find parking in the summer, for sure that sounds like a lot of the locals, and maybe that's okay. That's when, the tourists come in. So qualitatively, yes, peeling green curbs or dirt lots, maybe that doesn't look so good. I'm really thinking about the capacity. Are people avoiding the area because they know they tried once and they couldn't find parking? Again, I think it just takes some management, even if you did, let's say, time limits. And when I heard the question about the light touch, time limits for certain times. Do you do time limits and give people, warning tickets the first time around? Just saying, hey, we see you stay parked longer than you're supposed to. We're not going to ticket you this time, but this is a warning, and their license plate goes in the system by the third time they get a ticket. I'm sorry, I'm getting sidetracked here, but I think, are you losing out? I'm sure some days you are. Yeah.
The things that you were supposed to see, were they actually parking in the spaces? But even with the triangle lot, you know what I mean by that. It doesn't even look like it's a parking space, let alone if you're going to get ticketed if you go in there. Right. So was it an accurate study because there were empty spaces there? Because it really didn't look like it was a parking spot in general for somebody who's visiting. The locals might know, okay, yeah, this is where we park, when we can't find parking. I'm just saying, like, access, I think we're losing people already based on that, but did you notice that in your study collecting, but it's not mentioned?
I've spent a fair amount of time in Morro Bay. The field surveyors we had who are professional planners, but we talked when they were in the field. I will sometimes get reports from different cities saying, oh, this looks awful. Why would anybody park here? That's why they're not. I didn't hear that in Morro Bay. It is coastal. The ambiance is wonderful. I saw that lot up by the stacks. I think, you're talking about the triangle lot. And I saw in the letter, which was referred to, and I forget the gentleman's name, I apologize, but I saw, there was a proposal to put a parking structure there. And I looked at it and I thought, that's interesting because that's also one of the least busy locations. Now, if you had a really nice improvements and clean and landscape and signage pointing that way, certainly I think it would help. But there's a significant cost involved. I guess to answer your question, for example, if you saw a green-red curb, if I'm a visitor coming from anywhere and I see that curb and I'm thinking, can I park there? Maybe I avoid it. I know a local is going to come in behind me because they know that they can park there and won't get ticketed. Short answer, and I'm really giving you a long answer, I don't think it materially affected the availability. I think the problem's still there. If you cleaned all that up, would you get more capacity? Not materially, if at all.
right. Another area. Have you ever done any reviews after a city has enforced your pilot programs or your recommendations and seen how the outcome was? Positive, negative feedback from following through?
Yes, and I think typically bigger systems than yours. Let me give an example, and I don't want to say that Morro Bay is like Santa Monica because I recognize it's not. But something interesting that we did in Santa Monica, and I think it's illustrative, and I think, I've actually worked with our graphics people to try to demonstrate this, and it's a hard one. But Santa Monica, all the spaces in the structure along the promenade would fill early, and the cars would sit there all day. They had a long grace period, and at that time, the daily rate was quite low, maybe $7. And that's Santa Monica, so that was pretty low for Santa Monica. At the same time, we saw several facilities, parking structures on the periphery that would sit empty all day. So what we did was we said, drop the rates, half them. And I know we're talking about a paid parking environment, and I know this is different than Morro Bay, but bear with me here for a second on the concept. Basically, in the central area, we raised rates. On the periphery, we lowered rates. And we saw 800 cars, the numbers, played out, 800 cars that had been sitting all day, day after day, moved to the empty spaces on the periphery. Those 800 spaces then were turning 2.5 times a day. So we actually did the study for building 2 parking structures and looking for the revenue, and they were going to build some others on the periphery. But we said, wait a minute, on the periphery, people aren't parking anyway. So what happened was 800 cars long-term moved to the outside. Those 800 spaces turned 2.5 times a day. That was an additional 2,000 cars a day of capacity during their busy summer. So that was, again, it was paid environment, but it's still relative pricing. So what we're saying is encourage the short-term where it's busy, get the turnover, and encourage the use of the periphery, the long-term, and that's how you increase the overall capacity. So I think that was a pretty straightforward and illustrative example of that concept.
Yeah, that's great. That was what I was, that was a good answer. Thank you. All right. Do we have anybody else, members who want to ask a question of Stephen? And we can also ask City Manager Collins questions at this time as well. I'm not seeing any hands raised. Okay, are we going to open public comment at this time, Eric, to see if there's anybody that has any questions before we start discussion?
Yeah, I think we should if there's no more questions of either Scott or Stefan.
I haven't seen any, so yes, let's open public comment. And Highland, do we have?
Charisse, both Steph and I have to jump off the call, so just unless I need to leave. I don't know if Stefan had an extra time. I know you said 6:30, so we're already.
Oh, sorry, I have no idea what time it is. 6:40.
Yeah,
you're muted, Stefan.
Yeah, I do have a family event I needed to get to tonight. I can stay for a couple more minutes, but I'm going to have to leave pretty shortly.
Okay, so I guess it's, Highland can tell us, do we have anybody in public comment?
We do not have any raised hands, Chair Hansen.
All right, well then I think that we can say thank you so very much for your time and for your answers, and thank you both for joining us this evening. Very appreciative.
Thanks so much. Great question.
Thanks to both.
Thank you very much.
All right, bye. Okay, so we did the public comment, and now we have our discussion that's with our group. So we have the 2017 HAB memo that we wanted to look and see if we have covered, if the Walker study answered any of those, or if we still feel the same way. If everybody members got to look at that and evaluate it, I could go around the room and talk about that. So why don't we work on that first. So back in 2017, there were roughly 23 comments that were written. The Harbor Advisory Board's recommendation was that they agreed with paid parking and that they still wanted a future, more information as far as these other topics. So we have Lynn and Jean that were both part of this 2017 letter. And can I ask the two of you, since you were both part of that, that you felt that any of the things that were on this weren't covered? Or did you feel like a lot of the answers were received by the Walker study? Jean, would you like to go first?
Yeah, on the discussion area here in number 2, it says 2A, are the key findings and conclusions reasonable and accurate? It's the accurate part that I'm concerned about. You mentioned the triangle lot, and as you mentioned, that was considered in their parking number studies. But you and I both agree that that wasn't really a valuable parking area because most people don't use it. So it's hard to include that into the parking count, if you know what I mean. But besides that, I think he kind of answered that question. I'm not really sure whether he did or not. He liked to wander around on his answers. I will say that I've done some talk to various people, so basically a survey on the north end of the Embarcadero, up by the Rock area, and then on the south end of the Embarcadero, down by the boat launch. On the south end of the Embarcadero, the people I talked to were opposed to paid parking. On the north end of the Embarcadero, the key about the Rock parking, most people felt that it was definitely a different item and it ought to be separated out and dealt with separately. Those are my comments.
Okay. And then did you have a chance to review the 2017 and see if there was anything on there that you felt like really wasn't answered, or do you feel like a lot of the answers were solved in the Walker study?
I think they brought up quite a few points. I don't know whether they're all answered or not. Definitely the employee parking situation and the liveaboards and the fishermen were not answered in that study. That's my opinion.
Okay, so still a fisherman. Okay. All right. And Lynn, would you like to talk about the things that you encountered in 2017 and the letter that was...
Well, I didn't look back at the 2017 document, but one thing that has bothered me throughout the whole parking study thing is, as I remember from, I think it was the Walker study, the hours and the length of time that there was really a parking problem, and it was on the weekend for a few hours at lunchtime. In the evening, as if my memory serves me correctly, it was not such a big deal. We have some restaurants down there that serve dinners, but there was enough parking for them. It was a rather limited time and a limited time of year. Well, almost every weekend, and that's probably getting worse, but it's certainly not 7 days a week that there's a parking problem. It's 2 days a week at the most, and for the most part it was for 4 hours in the middle of the day. The groups that park for extended period of time, and those are the fishermen, and I have great sympathy for the fishermen. I think maybe we ought to, if we did this kind of parking, this is an aside, they should get a parking pass or a few parking places. But it was such a limited time, I just wonder how much we should spend on it as far as further restrictions.
Okay, so are you saying like as far as HAB's time reviewing it, the city council reviewing it, or just how much time on the street that it actually should be enforced?
what should be enforced on the street and how much we should spend on it. It just doesn't seem to me that it is a humongous problem. It's a problem, but relatively limited.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Lynn. All right. So I'm going to go down to, how about we start with Cal, since you're the chair of the parking. And as far as the 2017, I know you've been reviewing it, as
Sure.
far as things that you think the HAB or the group still don't feel are answered.
Sure.
Are there any that hit out?
Yeah, so my perspective is that 2017 memo was more geared towards, if we do paid parking, how do we take in the considerations for it? I like to believe that the current work that we've done today is how to get the most value out of the parking that's there. So we're not necessarily solving peak parking time, but those spots that have the most value to the retailers, the hotel people, how do we flip those spots so we get more revenue and also accommodate all the other special needs like the fishermen, the liveaboards, the boat trailers. So it was a little bit more subtle than that, but that was kind of what I was driving towards is, if Laurie parks in front of under the Sea Gallery for 2 months, you're not happy. Even if the rest of the lots are empty, that's a spot there. So, having people park appropriately is really what I'd like to see. And that wasn't addressed in the Walker study. They just said a lot of people park for a long time. I kind of rambled off on that. Did that answer your question, Charisse?
Okay. We're just trying to move forward with the 2017 document and see if we actually still have the same concerns or if they were answered.
Yeah, a lot of the same issues were brought up. I don't think the Walker study addressed a lot of the subtleties for long-term parking, though. They just grouped it all together, and the needs are different for the different bodies. But the rest of the memo, I think, has been addressed.
Okay. All righty. Okay, Chris, let's go to you next.
Well, this started out our committee started out as paid parking committee. And then we changed the language to parking management. And I kind of chuckled at the time. But the more I think about it, I think that is something that Walker did not adequately address, management, and that we should. We have a parking problem, which can be solved by more parking places. We have vacant lots in town. Everybody tells a story about how so-and-so won't sell their lot, or this or that, or the triangle lot, certainly with boat storage and the campsites in there. That doesn't look like a parking lot. Signage and getting rid of the campers will address that. What I'm saying is, and we brought it up in our meetings, some diagonal parking added up on side streets, Pacific Avenue, for instance. Get a hold of some of these lots, figure out how to make a deal, convert some of these lots, because we have a temporary parking problem. And if we can simply manage that by increasing the number of spots near the Embarcadero, I think that should be the pilot program, not the paid parking program per se, the Walker concept, that will in fact irritate Laurie, irritate me, and every step of it is going to irritate somebody, including the locals who can't believe anybody would charge for parking down at their rock. And so I think in our next meeting next week, we might want to talk about that a little bit more. I think the Walker study was valued, it's got statistics and all that sort of stuff. But I don't think it's money necessarily the city needs to spend first. I think increasing spaces would be a better idea, less expensive idea, and a better use of the pilot program. And I would remind some people that are listening that I know of 4 different vendors on the waterfront who've had their best day in history this past season. Well, if you had your best day in history this past season, how bad was the party? Anyway, that's all I have for now. Just the devil's advocate as usual.
All righty. Thank you, Chris. And Mary. Boop, boop. There she is.
I really agree with Chris's recommendation to like potentially explore some scrappy options. I think I'm like just naturally kind of paranoid, but anytime there's like a consulting firm who also designs like parking structures or things like that, I think oftentimes I've seen a pattern in business where you consult and then you see a need and then you fill the need with your business. So I'm like a little suspicious about like, you know, I think there's like maybe potential scrappy options like, you know, can we use your empty lot? Can we find like more for things like that? I also I think in general, like for me personally, like I can always find double spots in front of the yacht club where I'm like, might be an asshole and double park my car and laser sailboat. And if that was paid parking, I would just pay for hours and hours to continue to do the same thing. And so I don't know, like I'm concerned about like, do people who can pay still pay and go rent a kayak and like disappear into the bay for like hours at a time, or like how does paid parking actually solve it anyway? So my questions are answered, and those are my general thoughts on the matter of like agreeing with Chris mostly.
All right, thank you very much. And Laurie French, board member.
My questions weren't really answered. Just, you know, like I said, we're unique.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, every boat down there is a business. And most commercial fishermen that I know, when they're gone for, you know, the day or a couple days, they tend to try and not park in front of a business. They usually try and park, you know, away, not in front of a business. So.
Okay. So in this discussion period, when you say that they park farther away, and my main question to you is, are they loading and unloading a lot? It sounds like not really.
That depends on the time of the season. You know, what season, what they fish for. But like, okay, during crab season, if we're fishing here in Morro Bay, because fishermen, I mean, we move. We go to different ports. If we are here and it's crab season, yeah, pots and bait get loaded every day. For crab. Salmon, not so much. But those are more trips. Albacore, the guys are gone. Black cod, what would you say, Jeff?
Well, they have tubs of gear and bait.
Yeah, they have tubs of bait and gear that they do move.
Okay, so yeah, just trying to get the connection with the problem, and so okay. Well, thank you for your comments. All right. So the other part of this discussion period is should the city continue pursuing parking management, paid parking in and around the areas identified in the Walker study? And before I do that, I'm going to make my comments because I keep forgetting myself. One of the things that I wanted to say is thank you for Rick, who submitted a letter to us. It was very informative and some good advice, some good ways of thinking. I understand that that we have a problem only for a smaller increment of time on the weekends, in the summer. And we really, I don't know about putting meters on the street, because then when it isn't those times that they're charging, what are the people going to do? Just drive right on through, even though they wouldn't have even had to park, pay for that period of time. That's, it is, they'll see it and they'll just keep driving on and hopefully find a free spot. But Eric and Laurie, Stilts, have you guys ever sent out from the harbor department any kind of letters to other businesses requesting that their employees and themselves park off, or to commercial fishermen, or to anybody who uses it frequently?
I'm not recalling any specific letters or requests we've had that went out sort of leaseholder wide. I know I've had discussions with multiple different leaseholders at times over parking in general, and the topic of employee parking and whatnot has come up, and discussion centered around employees should be moving off the prime spots. But then there's always the stuff that you've already been brought up, the carrying cash and late night servers going home at the end of a shift, and there's a lot of different issues at play. Yeah, we've discussed it individually, but not on a wholesale basis.
Okay, because I know that I've tried to talk to people about it on the street, and there's the ones who offend, and then there's the ones who move off of the way. And then after a while, because the ones who just keep offending it, then we all end up coming down, because you're like, well, if you're going to park in front of my business, then I'm going to park in front of your business. And if there's a maybe one last ditch attempt to do that before starting with paid parking, I'm down with at least trying to do something as far as a request from everybody who is a regular on the Embarcadero, if we can send out something that they listen to, that possibly could get them to use the triangle parking lot, or can park up a little bit up above the bluff where there's free parking, not necessarily in front of residences, but something easier. So anyway, I'm just thinking that wasn't covered in the Walker study, and it really wasn't mentioned in the 2017, but maybe we should give it a try. Last meeting, I was informed, last parking management meeting, I was informed that Pacific Street had been studied, and that they had figured out that they can restripe it to make perpendicular parking spaces and double or even more increase the amount of parking spaces that are there. And I'm just wondering why we can't do that now. It seems like an easy thing to just, if we do create more parking spaces up there, and we send out a letter to in businesses, maybe they'll park there, because right now that's wasted space. If they're going to say that we can put them there, then why can't we do it now? Any knowledge about that, Eric?
I'm not super familiar with the process to do that. I know it takes a city engineer to sign off on it. We did it up at Market Street. We put in those perpendicular spaces for that very same reason instead of parallel, because it's such a wide street. I know it involves the city engineer. I don't know if it involves the city council to direct that or not.
Okay. All right. And so anyway, that would be one of the things that I would want them to look into. Walker study didn't actually talk about that either, but I think it should be a consideration of something to do sooner than later. And then yeah. Okay. So my questions got answered from that. And then so back to the question. So my answers are done. My questions are done. So should the city continue pursuing parking management, paid parking in and around the areas identified in the Walker study? So should I take a vote? I think I'm going to take a vote on this. And
I have a question.
Yeah, go for it.
Sorry to interrupt. We have another meeting as a parking committee. Are we not premature in taking a vote?
Well, it's something for the Harbor Advisory Board. It's something that the ad hoc committee is going to be there based on the fact that the city council is looking into it. And when they actually decide at the November or October, what is it?
November
7th, the second Thursday of November, when they meet, we're going to have one more meeting, and our ad hoc committee can still put in their advice, but we have it on here that I want to know from you guys.
Okay.
I mean, we might change our opinion, but it is on our agenda to look and see where the temperature of everybody is right now.
Let me quickly refine my comment. I thought Eric said that they were going to take up the subject at their November meeting. And I thought at the beginning of this meeting, and I thought, we have another chance to clean this up a little bit more at our next ad hoc meeting. Okay. And have this very vote at our next meeting before the city council's meeting.
Okay.
I'll take it either way, but that's what I was trying to clarify.
Okay. So.
Yes, I believe we do. I mean, with the council, the next HAB meeting is whatever the first Thursday in November is, and then council's the following Tuesday, the second Tuesday of the month. That's probably the only council meeting in November. So, yeah, there is more time to do more work if that's what the board generally wants to do.
Okay.
I'm going to jump in and add something here, just to maybe help inform the process. So, there's a lot of things. Kind of getting, paid parking keeps kind of getting taken out of context a little bit and wanting to be put on its own. Should we do paid parking? Should we not paid parking? I think, Chris, your balloon thing, there's parking management has to be looked at as a whole, and paid parking is one of the tools in the toolbox. Curb stripes, signage, there's excess parking lots. All those things add up to parking management. And what we have now is sort of a loose array of things that are out there for parking management, not many of which, if any, are really being enforced, except maybe 72 hours when we get a complaint. And so, enforcement is one of the issues at play in parking management, because if you have any kind of management of parking versus just, hey, it's free and everybody parks wherever they want, whenever they want, and maybe if you get a complaint, we'll make enforcement. Enforcement is a key part of it, and something has to pay for it. Something has to pay for striping. Something has to pay for, signage and all that. And so that's typically where paid parking usually comes in, absent some other source of funding. So it all has to be looked at as a whole. I just want to have the board keep that in mind. That I think Chris's balloon thing keeps coming to mind. You squeeze a balloon at one point and something else pops out. We've got to look at it holistically. And Mary, your point, and I'll use one of my sayings, what you said about, is it worth it? Is the juice worth the squeeze? I think is what you're trying to say. I don't know. I guess that's one of the things we're grappling with. And that's one of probably the first question for the HAB to answer that Sharice was getting at to get to the city council. Is this worth pursuing or not? Do we have a big enough problem to pursue or not? The Walker study attempted to get at that question and provide some answers, and they seem to think it does on a limited basis. Well, is it enough? I don't know. I think that's the work we're doing here to try and determine that.
All right, so let me reword this in the way that, because it does say parking management / paid parking. So we're not doing a vote that says that we are for paid parking, but is this still, worth pursuing as far as HAB's time? And so we don't necessarily have to take a vote on it. In fact, I'll just say, because of the concern that the ad hoc committee is going to meet again, and maybe next time we'll have a better presentation. I know that Cal has a PowerPoint presentation. I was told, Eric told me that you had one today. So I know that didn't get out here this evening. So based on the two things, I would say that we'll leave that vote till next week or next month. And Cal, you had some input?
Yeah, I was, what I'm hearing, and I did have the PowerPoint, I had it teed up, but I was a little hesitant to display it. I sort of read off it to the side. But what I was thinking of, wanted to vote on something, is to put together what a quote unquote scrappy plan would look like. Whether it's, restriping Pacific Avenue, putting signs up for triangle parking and volunteer, telling all the day fishermen guys, the charter stuff to go park in the triangle lot, those types of things, is to pursue that scrappy option again with the ad hoc committee, and then come back with, hey, here's a scrappy plan. You need to do this anyway to, optimize the parking here. And if you really want to go, full paid parking in the Walker study, that's a bigger investment. So I think it's just sort of that, what would a baby step look like that was relatively affordable to make the balloon a little bit bigger, and use, at least voluntarily use the spots more efficiently. I mean, I just feel bad for the GAFCO guy that, everybody parks in front of his building and then is gone all day. If there's something we can do to help alleviate that voluntarily, with flyers when you sign up or, something along those lines. So that's sort of what I'd like to propose, is that sort of the ad hoc, as we look at a scrappy plan A and then a more formal plan B based on the Walker study.
All right, cool. That goes to number 4. Any recommended next steps? So if I'm hearing everybody correctly, I think that what we'd like to hand out to the Harbor Advisory Board Ad Hoc Committee Parking Management is suggestions that we can give out to the City Council for their meeting in November. And in those, try and encompass all the things that have been really important to us, such as the fishermen, the liveaboards, how whatever it is that is a pilot program can possibly benefit or not further hurt any of those entities. I know that there was a comment as far as there's only a limited amount of time that it's really a pressing issue as far as parking. So maybe one of these scrappy things or the paid parking might be one of those things where it's a time and it's based around when it's actually a problem, and address those. And then what does long-term parking look like? What are we going to have with those issues? And we have talking about parking management rather than just paid parking. I had some other things written down. Lease lots. Chris brought that up. Is there any way to lease some of these spaces and still pursue those before we go full bore paid parking? And then I wrote down improve the triangle lot and a letter to businesses and to fishermen. So any of those, so thinking about all those things that have come up that I've been writing down that everybody's been commenting on, trying to include that in the next ad hoc meeting and come back with a letter of recommendations, suggestions, concerns that the HAB has and when the City Council makes their decision on November. Does that sound good to everybody?
Yes.
Okay. I second it.
Makes me happy.
All right. Okay, so now that we're done with our discussion, I don't believe I need to have a public comment open again. Or do I?
No, you had public comment.
Okay.
Over in the public, we just have 2 council members anyhow. So. Okay,
and we're not really making a motion. We're just saying that we're moving forward. So there's no.
We're working on it.
Been working on it.
With the aim to bring something to the HAB in November to get to the council in November as well, if I heard correctly.
Okay. So I believe we've concluded item B1. And ready to move on to our next one. So that is B2, update from the Marine Services Facility Ad Hoc Committee. Eric, should I pass that on to you or to the chair?
I have nothing to report.
Okay, and does the chair of the Marine Services Facility have any?
No, I've been up to my tail in parking meetings. There's nothing new on the boatyard or marine services.
All right, then we can should I open public comment for that?
Yep.
Yep, public comment. We would like to open up public comment for agenda number B2. Highland, do we have anybody in the queue?
Thank you, Chair Hansen. There are no raised hands in the queue.
All right, then I believe we can conclude item B2 and move on to B3. B3 is the update from the Finance and Budget Ad Hoc Committee, and I will ask the same thing. Eric or the chair have any new developments on this item?
I have one update you could give, Cal. We've been in touch with someone from the Division of Boating and Waterways about the shoreline erosion control program grants that they have. We're going to be meeting with them and just discussing like ways that we can be prepared and different options that we have for grants for some of the larger like capital maintenance improvement projects that we have.
Good.
Yeah, I think the committee for the budget, I think that's be the best use of our time is to sort of, like I say, what Mary's been doing is beating the bushes for grants for any of those capital improvements, because that appears to be the biggest budget issue that Eric has in that. And not so much the operating budget, but getting those big ticket items fixed. I think that's all the updates we have at this point.
Okay, and Eric, do you have anything to add?
Nothing more.
Okay, I have a question about that. Should I open public comment first or ask my question? Or it's not really a question. It's just, it is a question. Do I open public comment first or?
No, do your questions, then we'll go to public.
Okay. So Mary, have you looked into the American Rescue Plan Act for travel, tourism, and outdoor recreation?
No, I haven't. Let me change that.
I'll send you, I'll send you that one, but it covers a lot of bases. And so with all of the different things that need to be improved on the waterfront, you could definitely read this one and, find how it fits. That's all about if it fits the criteria for the grant, but it looks like it's a really good one, and we have until January to fill it out and complete it.
Okay. My goal is just kind of like, I think we want to put together like a sort of kind of like lookbook for all of the like big projects that are unfunded, and then just meet and kind of like figure out at first brush, are these good matches? And then only kind of like spend Eric and team's time on it. Like if it looks super promising.
Yeah.
I don't know what your feedback is on that, Eric, as far as a game plan.
Yeah, I mean, we've always, in whatever the grant that gets brought up for discussion at the HAB, and there's been many, it's always been, at least on our end, on the staff end, capacity to pursue it and do anything with it and look into it. It's just everything else to do. It's any kind of help is absolutely welcome.
Cool. Yeah, I'm excited about the one for seawalls. I mean, that could like be in revetment type stuff. It seems super promising. And also the man we've been talking to from State Parks up in Sacramento, he seems interested in visiting. And also he said like before the grant even opens this next year, he'd be willing to like meet with us and discuss our needs and kind of like coach us. So that's exciting.
That is very exciting. Okay, so if there's no further discussion, I'll open it up for public comment for finance and budget. Highland, do we have anybody in the queue for public comment?
Thank you, Chair. We do not have anybody in the queue.
All right, thank you very much. Okay, so moving on to agenda item B4, Harbor Advisory Board Member Public Engagement Outreach Assignment. Start with Jean Dowdy, Member Jean.
Once again, I've talked to several of the people on the sport boat fishing and recreational fishing, and once again, they've asked me to see whether we can get some lines painted down by the boat launch for it's easier for the trucks and to back up with their trailers. There used to be lines down there that were parallel with the boat launch, so it made it easier for somebody to back up. And that's the only comment I have.
Okay, thank you. That was a good one. Now let's go to Cal Myers.
The primary outreach I talked at the top of the meeting, it was for the residents down in the liveaboards about the bathroom, and there is some cleanup activity going on there with the maintenance people. Beyond that, I don't have nothing else to report.
Okay, and board member Mary?
I don't have any updates for my groups.
Okay, thank you. All right, and Chris Vale?
I've got nothing.
Okay. And member Laurie French?
Ditto, I don't have anything.
All right, and member Lynn Meissen?
I have nothing new to report. Thank you.
Okay. All right, so that leaves me. I did meet with master leaseholders, and it was all about parking. I will say that the majority of them were interested in paid parking. There were some very different responses that I wasn't expecting, such as in the middle of summer, if there's actually no free parking available, like if there's no parking spaces that are farther away, because we all try and park a little farther away than the entrance of our business, they will park in front if there is a space available, and that might be an issue. I know that in Avila, when I park, if there's no parking in Avila, you're just done. Like, so my employees will run around for like 3 hours for an hour and not find a parking space. So I was kind of surprised that even they condoned their employees parking in front based on it being free. And so they didn't want to have a situation where there was absolutely no place for them to park, and the only one was paid parking. That would, and it's very taxing on employees for having to pay for $7 a day or $20 a day when they're making minimum wage. It doesn't compute, and we might find ourselves in an issue. So that was a concern of a couple of different business owners. A lot of the stuff that they brought up was flow of traffic. They brought up the Rock, how people will go down to the Rock and how impacted Beach Street is when that happens. And they're really seeking to look into a pathway over the bridge. And I know that quite a few years ago, there were a lot of businesses who were really against any kind of entrance from Atascadero Road because they felt like it would deter anybody from visiting Morro Bay. They would drive into the Rock and then they would drive out right back onto the freeway. So that has changed. The majority of the master leaseholders that are in, at least the group that showed up, that was not a concern for them. There were a couple of hoteliers that were really concerned about parking, and they did not want paid parking in front of their business. So I'll continue to meet with them and get more information for the ad hoc committee, and then that will be put in together with what we talk about and come back to you guys for next month. As for my other outreach groups, I didn't get out to the schools this time just because paid parking didn't seem like a big one for them. So, but I will reach out again. And Eric, do you want to talk at all about the chamber and the contribution of pollution by animals at all? That group? No?
Well,
each thing that could possibly affect the harbor?
I guess it's an outreach group of sorts. I'll spare you the acronym unless I really get goaded into it, but there's a group that consists of Erica from the Chamber of Commerce, Greg Qualick from Public Works, the Public Works Director, myself, a couple other folks. Looking at, it kind of started with the genesis of it with bird droppings and the seeming increase in bird droppings we have, and it all kind of interrelates, kind of like parking. It's not just one issue. It's kind of springs from multiple things. One is people feeding the birds and animals and pigeons, their excess French fries or whatever. There's that part of it. There's the party boats that come in and dump their carcasses over the side in the bay. There's some of our fish cutters that may be dumping some of their carcasses in the bay. So it's a multiple different potential factors. And I think just a lot more people and a lot more trash that gets overflowing on the waterfront that the birds get into. And so the seagulls have really taken up residence in force on the waterfront and are causing quite a bit of droppings issue. So that feeding the squirrels is kind of surfaced again, at the rock. Have anybody seen some of those squirrels out there that are that big around? All those things have kind of surfaced. So this group is trying to tackle that and figure out what's the way to look at it from a holistic sense. And, it always starts with education and letting people know what the rules are and what the ramification of their actions are. So that group's active. So I'm pretty involved with that one.
Please tell me it's like Committee of the Reduction of Animal Pollution. Is that your guys' acronym? Please tell me that's your acronym.
Maybe.
Rats? Rats?
Committee for the Reduction of Animal Pollution, please. It's a backronym if I've ever heard one.
Oh, Eric is so proud of it. Come on. There's your goading.
That's what I heard.
You're not going to say what it is?
No, that's my
clapping my hands. That's it. Okay.
Anyway,
I said I'm going to clap my hands if that's it.
It is, but he has it's not like, anyway, the words are different, but he's not going to say it. Eric? Oh, geez.
Committee response to animal pollution.
Yes. Okay, one letter was off.
Oh, for Christ's sake.
It was close. Anyway.
Cocktail, please.
All right, we're getting on. Okay, so I'm going to open up public comment unless anybody else wants to make any more outreach comments. Nope. All right. Do we have anybody in the queue?
Thank you, Chair Hansen. Once again, there are no raised hands in the queue.
Once again. All right. Thank you, Highland. Okay, so our last and final one will be handled mostly by Eric. So take it away, oral report and question and answer on recent significant lease site activity.
Thank you. So this is a recurring item. We seem to have this about once a year, maybe every couple of years, and just kind of run down the waterfront and see what the latest and greatest has been and answer questions that folks may have on what the comings and goings on the waterfront are. So I'm just going to go from kind of north to south and run lease site to lease site and maybe pause over every few and see if there's any questions. I will say that, in the early months of COVID last year, we got a emergency coastal permit to allow restaurants to do outdoor dining, and a lot of people took us up on it. And a lot of them discovered they want to keep doing it even after COVID and when things get back to quote unquote normal. So we may see that on a more permanent basis as time goes on. So starting at the north end, Moore Bay Oyster Company, I'm not going to give you all the lease site numbers because they hate the numbering system and it just doesn't serve any point anyhow. I'll just give the common name. Moore Bay Oyster Company. They've started some retail sales there on site. Neil has also put in it's called a depuration system. It's a system where he's got his oysters in tanks that he can separate from the ocean when the rainy season comes, because the rainy season shuts down his harvesting if there's a certain amount of rain. So it puts it into a self-filtration system. He's got a pretty sophisticated system there. So he's up and running there, and he's starting to do some retail sales. And then that little unit up front eventually gets turned over to a little retail shop of commercial fish-derived products, most of his oyster products. So we'll see that hopefully coming in the future. United States Coast Guard right next door here. They added on 800 square feet. Between that and renting some additional housing in town, they're going to be able to billet women here again, which they haven't done for probably 25 years. I think it's the last Coast Guard station in the nation that doesn't have women billeted. So that'll be good. Unfortunately, it took up some parking spaces out in the parking lot because that was really the only place for them to go. But they've been going down into the intake parking lot, so it hasn't been too big an impact. So they're pretty close to having that done. I think they're just down to a few sign-offs in the interior, and they'll be ready to occupy that, which is great. In Moore Bay Landing, where Burgess used to be, probably 5 years ago now, but the Moore Bay Landing building, Grassy Bar Oyster Company's probably been there in Georgia a couple of years now. Similar system to what Neil has in Moore Bay Oyster Company, just a little different way of doing it. He's got a system that he can isolate from the ocean, which is great, and he's got a little retail shop down there too that he sells oysters and clams out of, which is great. Cuban, let's see. I'm going in upstairs is Milano's Cuban Cafe. Down at the far end, you've got the Thai Bounty, which also has a Cuban food element. Well, that Cuban part is moving to the upstairs restaurant that's in Fowler's new building there. And then downstairs, Bob's had an open space for quite a while now there, a small little retail space. He's got Camp One LLC, which is a company that runs state park concessions on the Central Coast, mostly Santa Barbara County, but a few up in this county, up in Big Sur. They're a small retail shop, and they'll also be doing bookings for their campgrounds and fishing as well. They're going to have trying to include some recreational fishing element to that as well. And Giovanni's, if there is nothing, no updates, I'm just going to skip over them. Giovanni's Fish Market, Central Coast Seafood. The Coffee Pot restaurant closed during COVID last year, and Giovanni's moved some takeout into there. You can see all the seating out into the parking lot there. So that's a relatively new occurrence. And I'll stop there at those 5. And any questions on any of those?
I don't have any questions if anybody else doesn't, but I will tell you that the Cuban place, if you're going to miss the outrigger, which Eric, you'll get to that particular area in a moment, I guess. He's taking a ton of the wood and the paneling out of the restaurant at 833 Embarcadero, and he's going to incorporate it into his new building or his new restaurant. So you get that nautical feeling when you go into the Cuban restaurant.
Interesting. Beneficial reuse. All right. Continuing on south, the Harbor Center, where the Krill's number 2 is there in Hofbrau. The Indie Collective was a little business out in the back, and the new little retail unit that was built there probably 2 years ago now. They closed. They were a COVID victim. But I believe we've got the Dough Connection in there now, a little bread place that has moved in. So we'll see what happens there. Anderson Inn changed ownership after probably the longest standing leaseholders on the waterfront, the Anderson family. They finally decided to retire and sold it to the Costecos, who run the Estero Inn down at the other end. They're staying in business as the Anderson Inn, which is great. So we were happy to see the Andersons going to retirement and going to the next phase of life. It was sad to see them go. They were great tenants. So look for the Costecos there. They recently did a pretty big remodel inside as well. Redid all the rooms and changed things out. So hopefully we can go out and have a look at that. Porthouse Restaurant, which is the old Otter Rock location. And I think that opened up right before COVID hit, maybe in the fall. Well, they're back open up, and then they've got a little business out in front. What is it? The Boatyard Marketplace. It used to be the hat shop in front. So look for that little retail shop. In the Boatyard complex to the south of that, probably reported on this, but they had a seawall failure there. There was a 3 or 4 year fix to finally get that done. That got fixed probably either late 2019, maybe in early 2020. So that's up and running there. And a new operator there is Toast the Coast, which is a fellow that's doing some charters off of a powerboat. Go out and do some little dinner and drink charters if you like. Any questions on those? Nope. Trying to cover sort of business openings and closings as well. I'll go back down my list when I finish with these. TLC next door to the Boatyard, Teresa's place, where the old Off the Hook restaurant used to be. TLC is doing a total redevelopment of that site, tearing it down completely, scraping it to the ground, putting in a new mixed retail restaurant hotel upstairs complex. They've gotten through all the permitting except for building permits, which they're in the middle of getting final permit sign-offs right now. So we're expecting that to break ground the end of this year, last couple of months of this year, perhaps November next month. That's the hope. And as you heard, it sounds like some of the old wood from the inside of there has moved down to the Cuban restaurant, which will be great. Next to TLC is the Libertine Pub. That's under relatively new ownership. The Libertine Pub owner, if you've ever been to San Luis and the pub there, same person. He's working on plans right now to do a redevelopment of that site. At least right now, the proposal isn't to scrape it to the ground. He's going to redevelop the existing building. He's going through some structural analysis to see if that building can do that. And once we get that back, it'll kind of spell the future for what's going to happen there. And he's also proposing to develop out the street end area there between there and Rose's Landing, because that's part of the Market Plaza development that the City Council approved, at least the concept of a few years ago. So we'll see where that leads. It really depends on the structural integrity of the building and whether or not he wants to continue forward with that. Any questions to those 3 or 4? Nope, seeing none. Moving further south, Rose's Landing. They did a major remodel. They used to have a restaurant upstairs. If you recall, went through several different restaurants over the last 10 years. Upstairs restaurants always difficult, just because it's hard to get customers to go upstairs for some reason. They all want to stay on the ground. So he converted all that restaurant space upstairs and added some more space and added in, I think, 10 or 11 hotel rooms. They just got opened up, I think, like November, December, he got going. And he's up off the ground there, and then did some pretty major redo of the Harbor Walk along the backside. Added some more Harbor Walk space around the backside of the restaurant, and then a new connection to the street end area in the middle there between them and Libertine. So that was great. Moving next down, the Dutchman's Landing. They just went to Planning Commission last night. They're proposing, so there used to be a commercial fish buyer there that had historically been there for quite a number of years. The last one was a slime eel buyer that went out of business probably in COVID year. It might have been the year before. It's always been a tough place to operate a fish buying operation just because moving that commercial activity through all the tourism has never been easy. Well, the slime eel buyer finally hung it up there. And the Dutchmans, the owners there, are proposing to convert that little unit in the back to retail sales. They're shortening up the wharf that used to serve as a fish unloading to be public access, and then they're connecting through the harbor walk where there isn't one now between Roses and the building next door, because right now there is no connection through. That's one of the gaps. So they'll be finishing up that gap, and they'll do, I think, some outdoor seating, permanent outdoor seating as well. So that'll be good. Next down, Marina Square. Just had mostly some business changes there. Blue Sky Cafe is sold. It's staying the same name under new ownership. So hopefully you'll see no changes there. Also in Marina Square, we've had a couple new businesses built in. One of them named Dress Your Soul. Another one, Babylon Soap Company. Babylon Soap Company, I think, was in the Dutchman building. Left Dutchman building for maybe a year or so, and now has come back. So that's what's going on there at the Marina Square building. Any questions on any of those?
I'd like to go back up the street a little bit if we could.
Sure.
You said the Libertine may keep going with the existing business, or they might build. Are you talking into the cul-de-sac there?
Yeah, so the existing business, Libertine's going to continue on there as a pub and food service. He's proposing to, I should add, I didn't say this, add hotel rooms to the top space where currently there's restaurant and some office spaces. Open up a fair amount of public access space on the bottom floor, on the ground floor where the parking spaces are now, and then develop out into the parking area between there and Roses. It's RM Design Group did some concept designs that were approved by the council several years ago for the whole Market Plaza for that area. The chessboard, Centennial Parkway, that whole thing is a big concept plan that the city's been looking at trying to do. And so he's going to proposing to kick off the first part of that by using that.
Well, being a member of the parking management committee, it's sort of like, what? Oh, so now we're going to lose parking spaces. Well, we're trying to create parking. I know. Yeah. It just, I had not heard about that before. Yeah, it caught my ear.
Yeah, well, and it's an interesting juxtaposition, absolutely. That, but the flip side of it is parking is not the best and highest use for waterfront property, and so I don't know if there's. Like I said, the city's plans for all those parking ends at some point are to develop them into public space, but how do you recreate the public parking is always going to be the challenge.
Yeah, that's interesting. The other thing is if we do connect all of those buildings along the waterfront, then we can't see the water. And it's just something else that I've heard people talking about now. Anyway, that's it.
Well, all the buildings that redevelop, when they do major redevelopments, they've got to have view corridors and setbacks and all that kind of stuff. So those generally come into play to keep those open spaces open. So moving down to the aquarium, as you know, the Morro Bay Aquarium went out of business several years ago. It's been empty for a while. Three Stacks and a Rock Brewery is moving in. They've been doing a lot of construction on the interior. We, the city, are probably in the next couple of weeks, we got to replace some sewer and water lines out in the street. They're hoping to get opened up and under operation by the end of the year. The old seal tanks on the outside, they put a deck over that, so there's going to be seating out there. And then a little brew pub on the inside with some limited food service, so that'll be a great addition down there. Next door to them in the La Roque mixed retail and hotel units there, the sort of the mirror image ones with the driveway up the middle. The only real change in there has been where the Morro Bay Paddleboard Company used to be. They left, they went out of business. Now it's Cal Coast Adventures, which is bike rental sales, and they do some tours, e-bike rentals and sales. So that's a new business that came in during the COVID year, which was great. The Salt Building, they're working on plans to convert the space upstairs there to hotel rooms, because again, that was built by Jim Mall. He was the original builder and owner of that building. I think the upstairs space was his offices, his architecture office and his management office. Well, he's been gone a long time, and it's always been tough to get any kind of a renter up there that matches the code requirements, because you can't have office space, non-visitor serving office type spaces on the waterfront. So it's always been tough for them to fill anything up there. And so they're going to convert those to hotel rooms. questions on any of those? Gene, look like you're leaning in for something there.
Oh, just on the stall building, we're going to be reinstalling the marina slips down in front there.
Okay. So some slip redos down there as well. Thank you. Gray's Inn next door to that. They completed their harbor walk across the backside, so they've made that connection from La Roque next door and done some ADA improvements to the building. And then eventually, hopefully, that harbor walk will connect through behind what used to be the old Kayak Horizons. It's now Morby Paddle Sports. Morby Paddle Sports used to be down at Marina Square. They moved down probably before COVID. They've been down there a couple of years now, maybe. So hopefully the folks that own the Gray's Inn also have the Morby Paddle Sports lease. So they're hopefully, now that COVID is winding down, they'll be coming back to maybe propose a redevelopment of that lease site as well. And then finally, Associated Pacific, no real changes there other than the longtime tenant, Reg Whibley, passed last year. And so not at Associated. Associated Pacific was owned by Paul Gill and the actual construction company in the big building. The two smaller little rental house type buildings to the south was Reg Whibley. So he's passed, and his widow's trying to figure out what we're going to end up doing with those because that lease expires here in the next 5 years. And then down at the south end, beyond the launch ramp, nothing new or different really down there other than maybe as in COVID year, the Glad's Landing might have changed hands. That leaseholder is now Bill Martini, who owns the old cannery building next door. So there may have been an ownership change over the last year there. But otherwise, nothing structurally has changed down there. And that is my report.
All right. Well, thank you so much. And I know that you asked for questions throughout it. So I think we kind of got all of our answers. I don't see anybody's hands unless anybody wants to speak up right now. No. So I'll open it for public comment. Highland, do we have anybody in the queue?
We do not. Thank you.
All right. Okay. So that concludes all of our working items for this evening. Thanks. And we're adjourned.
Charisse, did you want to do declaration of future agenda items?
Oh, gosh, darn it. Okay. Does anybody have any future agenda items that they would like to add for consideration? Seeing no hands raised, hearing no voices, we can leave the future agenda items as is.
Can I add one other thing, Charisse?
Sure.
I forgot to mention there's a free concert in the Cloisters, October 24th, just for everyone here as a shout out.
Yay, shout out. All right. Thank you. Okay, so
Make a motion, we adjourn.
Okay.
Second.
All right. So now we have a motion out there. We need to take a vote. Laurie?
Voice.
Okay. Member Dowdy.
Aye.
Member Myers.
Yes.
Madam Muse. No, she's right here. She's whining.
Member Hanson.
Oh, Madam Muse, are you hungry? Did you not get snacks?
I'm sorry. I didn't hear you, Charisse.
I'd like some snacks.
Oh, you were asking me. Okay, I didn't hear that part. I heard snacks. Yes, I'm good.
Member Vale.
No. Okay, yes.
Member French.
Yes.
Member Witkowski.
Yes.
Member Myosin.
Yes.
Okay, your motion passes. You may adjourn.
All right, thank you. We're adjourned, and I'm going to a concert. Bye.
Thanks.
What? That's so fun.